All right. Hey, welcome back, everybody. So this video is going to drive some people away, but it's probably gonna, if you just go in with an open mind and you think of it as a pattern. I may be saying a lot of religious language and saying things that make people uncomfortable with what I'm saying, but all I'm trying to do is use these words in a way that draws the connection of what's being used. So don't go in with it thinking that, okay, this person's trying to convince me of this entity that doesn't materially exist. All I'm trying to do is draw the patterns of how to unlock your right hemisphere and left hemisphere. And the easiest way to understand it is to simplify them to the highest extent possible in one concept. So if you just think of Lucifer, it is everything you'd associate with your left hemisphere. If you look it up, like just look up what that is, and like and also if like there's a few things they don't add, like an infinite regress. That's what your left hemisphere wants. It wants to simplify things to the smallest components possible to understand what makes it tick. And often what it does is it oversimplifies and it goes too far into analysis and it's not able to take into account the whole. And as societies get more and more ingrained in a specific framework, they become more and more regressive and they refine it more and more. And they look at it as simple answers. Like, here's the simplest answer, the simplest way to think about things. And then the right hemisphere can do the opposite. So it goes off into drawing connections that aren't there in between things. Like, I don't know, like 9/11 was an inside job. Like there's obviously always elements of truth to things, but just because like your theory is 10% accurate and then you could just make up the rest, you can get anybody to believe you. So there may be some shady stuff that might have happened during 9/11, but I'm not sure, the evidence isn't there for us to definitively decide whether or not it happened. So that's how your right hemisphere is how you get people who are conspiracy theorists. They draw connections that aren't there. And then also the same with females. Females are primarily or more oriented towards their right hemisphere perspective. So innately, they already understand the inner workings of it and that it can go wrong. Whereas when it happens to men, they just chalk it up as like something, oh, whatever, I just had a brain fart or something. But you're just you were drawing connections that weren't there. So the first true dichotomy is tier 0 because 0 doesn't exist in our universe. So that's why I used tier 0. Because these concepts exist outside of our universe, but they are everything. They are the whole universe. So it's a combination of everything in the universe and outside of the universe. So it's one of those things that every single thing that you look at in terms of true dichotomies and synthesis, that's everything. That's all there is to existence. So we have the true dichotomies of space, time, and energy. And then those three things synthesized every tier in this tier system that I'm going to give you guys. So the true dichotomies came first, and then they started synthesizing. Okay, and what is the fundamental? I mean, I should have went over this, I think, in the other video, but the fundamental underpinning of what a synthesis is difficult to describe, and it could be in service to Lucifer, and it could be in service to God, or it could be in service to something. One of the perspectives, and what you would want to do is have it be in service of that holistic thinking, because you're taking everything into account. Yes, you draw faulty conclusions sometimes and faulty associations, but you'd much rather do that than regress too much into a specific and then the whole system collapses. So obviously there's a delicate balance between the two, and that's what I advocate for. Like, find the homeostasis, and that's what we have to do. But in order to do so, we first have to understand how these true dichotomies manifested in every single tier. So we have to understand the synthesis first, which I'm going to go over, and then eventually I'll go over like have to build the true dichotomies within each one. So like an example would be the existence or the creation of the universe by Lucifer and God were created the first three true dichotomies. So the first synthesis from them created the next three. And I have to draw that pattern within each tier. So from tier 0 to tier 1, God and Lucifer at both ends of these spectrums of infinite regressive space and infinite expansive space, they're both working together and in opposition to create this. So Lucifer still works for God, but he's the fallen one that prevents us all from just being with God all the time. So he's always trying to regress things to the specific, make everything infinitely small, whereas God is trying to make everything infinitely whole or large, or it's everything. He's all the energy, all the space, and all the time, whereas Lucifer is none of the space, none of the time, none of the energy, but he wants what God has, so he's always going to try to take it, which is entropy. So that's the concept. That's how it connects to the things we observe in reality, like entropy and eventually synthesis. So entropy is when things fall apart, which is of Lucifer, but synthesis is when things come together, and that's of God. But it's interesting because Lucifer has to break things down into components before God can synthesize them into larger wholes. So that's how it works. It's like a back and forth. It's like a wrestle between the two. And that wrestling has, over time, created us in the image of these true dichotomies. So we are in the image of space, time, and energy. And we've been created across billions of years of context and many tiers of these syntheses. So it's taken us a long time to get here. And hopefully we can continue down the right track. And that's what I'm going to try to elaborate on. It's like, if you do everything for love, the things that you're doing for your relationships, for the sake of life, for the sake of synthesis, for the sake of God, for the sake of aiming up and trying to better everybody's lives, that's when we all do that willingly with each other in congruence with all these aspects, then we'll have homeostasis, and we'll have what brings about, the spirit of Jesus back into everybody's hearts, and we'll have that again. So, unable to articulate it's impossible to fully articulate, and the best thing you could do is just put it in this perspective of a true dichotomy of what Lucifer and God is, or the first true dichotomy. And so those are the rationalized extremes, but then they make up everything in the middle, the clashing in everything all the way through towards the middle, which is where they meet and they clash. So God is infinite, Lucifer is nothing, they clash. So it's entropy, and you can say what fights against entropy is synthesis. So entropy and synthesis. And they're both in an eternal battle, and we have to help God fight against entropy towards synthesis. And then it's nothing, everything. Like when you think with your left hemisphere, you regress down to nothing. You continue to try to break things down and create entropy in the world. It is literally, that's the purpose of our left hemisphere, is to break things down and manipulate them, and to make things worse, not better. So our left hemisphere is useful in a lot of ways, and it helps balance our right hemisphere perspective, but it can very easily destroy entire civilizations in its own way. But so can I wouldn't say the right hemisphere does so as much, but what the right hemisphere will do more of is draw those connections that aren't necessarily there. And you could say that's like, okay, well, that doesn't really necessarily hurt anything or anybody, and you would kind of be right. But in not paying attention to the facts of the matter, you're going to lose sight of the future and the past. So when you're just paying attention to what's present and you're trying to take everything into account, the right hemisphere cannot see the future or the past. So it doesn't take those into account. Whereas the left hemisphere is like, ooh, we need to take this future into account and the past. And the right hemisphere is like, okay, that is something we need to take into account as long as it's listening to the left hemisphere. So that's what the left hemisphere has to offer as well. So it offers the ability to synthesize. So out of nothing, quarks and leptons arise. But that's because of the infinite pull of God, like him pulling through the true dichotomy to create synthesis towards him. So that's where we're heading. We're heading towards God, heading towards heaven in each tier of synthesis that goes through the universe. So quarks and leptons, and then God had Lucifer create the next tier of synthesis. So in that negotiation, that battle, that compromise between God and Lucifer, between chaos and order, the divine masculine and the divine feminine, they had that negotiation, that eternal battle between each other. And that's what's happening in our minds. It happens in reality. It happens at every level of analysis all the way down. And obviously you could say there's fixed structures and like there's physical constants, and it doesn't look like somebody's straight up like manipulating reality, but these are the underlying patterns. So don't think of it as these beings are directly impacting physical material reality. This is the underlying pattern beneath all of that. It's what's manifesting everything else. So all the patterns. So you don't have to view them as necessarily, it's difficult to say this because it's like your right hemisphere wants these things to be physically, materially true because it wants to have a relationship with them. And you have, like, in order to think with your right hemisphere, you have to engage with it them that way, like they are beings. So in order to unlock that perspective, you have to engage with it as if they're beings and you have a relationship to them, or else you'll never be able to unlock that hemisphere perspective. Sorry, I'm kind of slouching. But it's like as I think so critically, or like hard about this, like it gets stressful. So I'm like, it's like I'm growing brain cells or something, or like as I talk about it and think about it, because it's very painful to think this at this level for this long of time. So no matter how you conceptualize, it'll be partially correct and partially wrong. So you cannot be 100% wrong, and you can't be 100% right. Both of those are impossible. So it's another true dichotomy. Like truth and falsity is another true dichotomy in reality. If you were to actually objectively look at something, I could say anything, and there'd be some element of truth to it. And you could find that and navigate it through the relationship it has to do with everything else. And one of the reasons for that is you cannot come up with a concept that does not exist in reality. Any concept you come up with will be true of reality in some way. And like, for example, if I come up with a unicorn and I say, well, what is a unicorn? Well, it's just a horse, and we rationalized a horn onto it. So both of those things exist in reality. Okay, come up with something that doesn't exist in reality. I'll wait. It's like you're not going to be able to. It's impossible. And but that's what our left hemisphere does. It rationalizes that anything is possible in reality when there's things that are not possible. And we need to understand that in order to understand how our left hemisphere works and how our right hemisphere works. So again, these are the patterns and the connections that we need to draw out our right hemisphere perspective. But we have to understand, it's like not only the right hemisphere perspective is what you need both. And this is what we should all be advocating for. It's like, hey, if you're very religious, staunch religious, to the point where it's affecting relationships to a high degree, it's doing all these things, you're losing your ability to compromise with people. Let's say you're like super religious and you can't see this other perspective anymore because you're like disgusted by it. And obviously disgust is of the right hemisphere as well. So that these are all things that you're trying to grasp too hardly on. And what ends up happening is you end up doing the opposite of what you wanted to. You end up falling victim more because you're ignoring this whole other aspect of yourself. You fall more victim to some of these aspects of Lucifer because you're trying so hard to, instead of integrating Lucifer and God together, you are trying to push Lucifer away and not utilize him as a tool in service of God. So we need both. We need that left hemisphere perspective, and it needs to be in service to the right hemisphere perspective. And we need to not become ideologues in that way. So I explained a lot there, and I went off on a couple tangents, but the first true dichotomy you just think of as Lucifer and God, and every single true dichotomy that exists in our universe that we can come up with exists in these two. So like some examples are just some of the other ones. Hate and love. Hate is of Lucifer. Love is the opposite, right? Of God. Purpose, meaning. Purpose is of Lucifer. God is of meaning. Individual versus collective. Individual is of Lucifer. Collective is of God. Internal versus external. This one's a little bit different because it's they both exist internally in us and then externally as well in the patterns in the universe and the patterns in our minds. What's more true dichotomies? So some of them have to do with where the location of where these are the true dichotomies. So internally, which is what would be what tier it's in. So internally in us, or are you talking about internally in an atom? Because God and the devil and God inside of an atom, that would technically be internal to you, right? But then you have to go down a tier, or a few tiers, down to the level of analysis of the atoms in order to understand the internal versus external within that atom. So that's how you would view it. It's like in my body, you would go down. It would go down to cellular. I'm a multicellular social being, so I have to go down to the level of what it would be like to be just a multicellular being, and then multicellular being. So multicellular being, multicellular, or just cellular being, and then molecules, then atoms, and then quarks and leptons, and then eventually the underlying essence of how consciousness manifests out of the universe. So does consciousness emerge out of the universe, or is it just whatever is in our brains? Either way, we connect our brains. Our brains are connected with every level of analysis all the way down, and it's a ripple effect. So anything that ripples down from the level of your brain all the way to quarks and leptons into the fabric of the universe causes a rippling effect. I don't know what that is yet. We don't, like, this is going to be stuff we study. I'm just giving everybody the perspective of what this means. Like, what does this all mean? So, and what the framework is, because the true dichotomies provide the framework, and then the syntheses allow you to understand why we even have a left hemisphere. Because if God never synthesized anything, and never synthesized us as beings with Lucifer's help, then, or Lucifer as his, his like servant, you could say, or like person that worked alongside him, then we would never exist, and there would be no reason for us to even have like a right hemisphere either. But the true dichotomies would still exist even if the syntheses didn't. So tier 0 is technically not a synthesis. It's just the original true dichotomy. It's God. And that's why you have to have them before you can even have a synthesis, which is the tier 1 synthesis. Okay. So That's how you can understand them. And then I've written, and like obviously I'm going to put it in the description again, but I have all the rationalized abstract true dichotomies. Lucifer and God, yes, they're holy, they're divine, but there are a creation of our mind. Like not the actual pattern or the beings, but the words that we apply to them. So we can apply, I can say chaos and order, or it would be order the other way around. Order is of Lucifer, chaos is of God. And if I just said that those were what the pattern is, then it connects to everything else. So I could just be there. But then it's not quite there, because does chaos and order, like, does it take into account reductionist and holist? Because not necessarily, because one is more associated with like entropy and one is more associated with bringing things together. But it's like all connected, but it's not quite there. It's always going to be, it's an ever moving target. That's why true dichotomies are like, each one's a piece of the puzzle, but because there's an infinite number of them, we'll never have the full puzzle, but we can get closer and closer. So the more true dichotomies we come up with, the more accurate our end will be when we do a factor analysis on those true dichotomies. So whenever we reduce them to the necessary ones in order to understand the universe, that's when we'll have a full articulation of true dichotomies and the ones that we need that are necessary for at least humans to understand the underlying concepts. They'll still be rationalizations, but they're going to be the closest, most accurate ones without having all this extra jargon that we can reduce it to fully understand what these concepts are. So yeah, let me begin on the writings that I have on Lucifer and God, because this stuff gets complicated. Like, oh my gosh, it's crazy that it's almost impossible I could go on forever just about Lucifer and God, because it encompasses everything. The pattern's everywhere. It's in everything, everywhere, at any time. And the problem is because I can literally sit here and write this whole book all over again just by writing it through the lens of Lucifer and God. So I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to waste anybody's time. But what I want to do is at least elaborate it from this perspective. And anybody can come and read it. But a lot of it has to just do with the fundamental underpinnings, and it's more of a narrative, and that's how you, in relationship with beings. So that's how you like picture why Lucifer and God are so useful, because it's simple, so our left brain kind of likes it, and it's relational, so our right brain kind of likes it. So that's why it's such an easy concept to understand. But elaborating on it would take a lifetime, and I don't have that kind of time. And a balanced person cannot possibly try to do that. So all I'm going to do with that is leave it, and I'm going to add information over time as I have associations, but I don't think I would ever be able to finish or elaborate fully on what this concept means. These two concepts, sorry. But like one example is, I think Gabriel, he's the angel that delivers messages. And I think that's referring to the corpus callosum in our brains. Like people can somehow understand that there's some kind of mechanism that's delivering messages between the hemispheres. They intuitively understood that. And that's what I truly believe, that most of the Bible is an internal perspective. It's a way to understand psychology. It's our first attempt at understanding it. But then we saw like, okay, well, if all this is going into my mind, I see the patterns externally as well. Like, why is the same pattern that I find in my brain and mind also everywhere I look in the universe, between people, the interaction, when I see things fall apart, decay over time? All these things are of this nature of coming together and falling apart. And so that's what we're fighting against. We're fighting against entropy. And in service of God. And guess what? Entropy wants to break things down. And that's why Jesus advocated for love. And that's his main message. Because synthesis, compromise, all these things are of the nature of love. And that's what God wants you to do. He wants you to love everyone around you the same way that you would love yourself. Because we are of the same being. We're all a part of God. We're made in his image. But we're not his. We are not him. So we're part of him, but not him. So, and that's also why I don't think Jesus ever actually claimed to be God himself, because Jesus understood he was still part of God, but I just don't think I don't see how he would have ever said that. But I'm not a historian on it. This is just me thinking in this way through the right hemisphere. Why would Jesus say that? I think it's the rationalization of men to put him at a higher place, which he was. He was at the highest place among men, and he's still there waiting for us to engage with his spirit again. And that's what his return is going to represent. I don't think necessarily Jesus is going to physically come down from outer space into the world through the clouds. I don't think that's. I'm going to go into all the I wouldn't say exaggerations, but the framing of the Bible is a lot of it's due to the origin of oral language and the attempt to make things much more memorable, but at the same time draw the patterns. So one example is I'm going to talk about Jesus another day. Sorry, getting off track. Jesus is very important, and he's one of the first ones that I think understood true dichotomies. He just didn't know how to articulate it because we didn't have the understanding of everything that we know now. We didn't actually know what these concepts represented, but now we can tie them to so many things in our psychology, because people had these ability to navigate their mind. There's people that can just navigate their mind in this way that's incredible. We have lost this skill, and I think we'll be able to get it back once we understand all this, but it sounds a little kooky, but that's what I think. And let's see. So that's Luciferian God. And I'm going to post the link to this again in every single description from now on, so that anybody can come in and comment on any of this stuff. So Lucifer and God is the first true dichotomy, and it represents everything in the entire document. It's these two clashing, and God manifesting things. That's the utility. If I were to just simplify it, so you could be okay, what does this tell me? Well, it just tells you that there's a true dichotomy here, and the underlying representation of everything, the physical aspects, the material aspects, the spiritual aspects, all these aspects of reality because of what spiritual is abstract, I think. So all these aspects of reality follow this pattern, and it all comes down to just Lucifer and God, and you can put everything in one of these two camps, and they are the rationalized extreme. If you understand the true dichotomies I've laid out in the beginning, they're the rationalized extremes. So they exist outside of reality in order to understand the full breadth of what's at play. Okay. That's how the left hemisphere sees it, at least. The right hemisphere is going to see it as a distinct being that they have a relationship with, and both of them are right in their own way. And that's what we need to make sure we understand, is that both are right. And that's what the left hemisphere hates. It hates seeing that two things are true at the same time. How can it be a being and have a relationship with it while also being a concept which simplifies it and makes it for the sake of utilization? Well, that's the challenge we're all going to have. We're all going to have this challenge of unlocking our right hemisphere and trying to find a balance and understanding that both meaning and utility, or utility and meaning, have very valid perspectives, and we need both to come together, and it makes you feel whole. It makes you feel so, I wouldn't say powerful, but it makes you feel like you're so ready to do anything. Like you're ready for anything, any perspective, anything that anybody throws at you. Like if you throw me God, I'm ready for it. If you throw me science, I'm ready for it. And I want both, because they're both important and they're both help us understand reality. And the liberal perspective has just gotten out of hand. It's gotten too far towards Lucifer, and it's led to so much destruction of people. And I'll go into that in another video. And eventually there's a judgment that I'm going to go over that I think is going to be the judgment for these individuals, not my judgment. This is what I have connected that will result as because of the patterns that I see. So yeah, I'll go over those in another video as well. So if you have any comments or questions or anything, I am here for anybody. And if anybody is having issues, I will always be here for you. And it's funny because I've tried to contact some major individuals to try to elaborate on this, or like get some feedback or anything, and it's very difficult. So, and that's the hard thing about when you rise to the top as you become a higher, more prolific individual, is you start to ignore the bottom, because you're like, well, they don't have anything really powerful to say. But Jordan Peterson knows this, but everybody has something very powerful to say, and we all have a little piece of it. And I'm telling you, each one of you has something incredibly powerful that you need to find within yourself to manifest it. So you just have to find it, because I've never been the most intelligent person. I've never been the most physically, like, nothing. I've never been anything. I've been, I would say, mediocre for the majority of my childhood into my teenage years. I've never done anything excessive. I've never done anything amazing. But I've written this document, and like, this thing is going to change the world. And I truly believe this. And it sounds like it's going to be world sweeping change to the perspective of how religion and science and in the left hemisphere, the hemispheric differences, the true dichotomies. Like, I think this will apply to everything. And one example would be like full self-driving cars. So when you take true dichotomies into play, that's what they need to do to properly navigate the world. For example, if you have a car that needs to balance time with the speed and rate it's going through space, well, it needs to find the right balance. And a proper way to gauge this is to create a true dichotomy, like a rationalized true dichotomy within this space, within its own mind, for it to navigate. So how fast should I go? How slow should I go? Should I accelerate? Et cetera, et cetera. And then what it's going to do is going to find a balance in this between acceleration and stopping, somewhere along the spectrum, that it's going to stop it and find an equilibrium. And I argue the equilibriums that we're going to find that is required for AI to navigate the world are the same true dichotomies that we'll need to understand and manifest. And it's going to get very interesting very quickly for our species. So I think the rest of them are going to flow much smoother for a lot of people. That's because our left brain so much ingrained in our left hemisphere. So tier 1 through 7 is going to be, it's going to be a lot more scientific and rationalized, because it's so deeply ingrained in, that's how we understand each one of these synthesis tiers, because the utility of them matter much more than the meaning currently in our current understanding of this. But guess what? We're made up of each one of these tiers. We are a tier 7 being, and we should be proud of that. And we're heading towards tier 8, which is scary, and it's scary and it's chaotic every time there's a new synthesis tier, because you're infinitely expanding the possibilities of reality at each tier. So like the first one, it was 1, and then it creates 2, or 3 actually, sorry. So then it exponentially grows from there into the subatomic particles, where there's so many more things that can happen. So complexity increases as well as instability. So as we approach God, we're going to be even more and more unstable. And what would you say? Ever more susceptible to things in reality happening to us. So it's kind of like the more complexity you add, the more things can go wrong. So if we don't take everything into account perfectly, it's just over. I mean, I wouldn't say over, like everything dies, but your system will collapse, whatever it is that you're trying to solve. So it's almost like adding more and more atoms to the periodic table. As you add more, they become more and more unstable, more and more protons and neutrons. So we're limited. We're limited by reality within all these true dichotomies. And atoms are a true dichotomy too. I'm just not sure how to frame it yet. But it's interesting that some of the most cuckoo ideas seem to be one of the ones that fit the most. But I'm going to elaborate on it, and when I see the truth, I'll know it. But yeah, so the next video is going to be on the fundamental first 3 true dichotomies, which I've kind of elaborated on in other ones. So I'll just make it another short video. All right. Thank you guys. Love you. Hope you have a good week.